Greetings and welcome to episode 184 of Zilog and Moto. I'm your humble host Dave, and this is your weekly-ish look at the English language libraries of the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega CD, and 32X. I try to have a good mix of reviews here on the channel, and that's not just from a game genre perspective. In other words, I don't want to just be reviewing a bunch of shooters or a lot of football games week after week after week. I mean, that's going to get old for me, which could possibly skew my review scores, and, I'm sure that's not going to be too interesting for you guys out there either. But, along with trying to keep a good mix of genres, I also try to mix up which consoles get featured from week to week as well. Now, that I don't do quite as good a job with, and there's definitely some stretches where certain consoles are going to get featured for a few weeks in a row, but it is something that I'm at least conscious of. So far, during Season 5, I've reviewed a Genesis game in Pele 2 weeks ago, a seldom seen 32X game last week with Zaxxon's Mother Base 2000, and now this week we're looking at a Master System title in Asterix and the Secret Mission. Who knows, maybe next week I can pull out a Sega CD title and go for the cycle to start the year. And that was a baseball reference for those of you that aren't Americans, by the way. And I imagine there's probably going to be a few of you out there watching this video, considering that this week's game wasn't released here in any format, as even the Game Gear port skipped a US release, which honestly I'm kind of surprised by, as its sequel was released here that same year. The game in question for this week's review, which was released for the Master System in PAL regions in Brazil in 1993, as mentioned, this game was not released in the United States due to the Master System being long dead in the United States at that point, and actually none of the 3 Master System Asterix games were released here due to them all releasing in 1991 and later. And probably also due to the fact that Asterix simply isn't quite as well recognized in the United States as he is in other parts of the world. Having said that, if you are one of those people who isn't familiar with Asterix, I should probably quickly summarize the character. Asterix is a cartoon character who was created in 1959 in France by René Goscinny and Albert Uderzo. And if you're French and I just murdered those names, I greatly apologize. Anyway, Asterix is a Gaulish warrior. Some may call him a barbarian, but I think that's a bit rude. And as a Gaulish warrior, he is represented as defending the Gallic portion of Europe from the Romans, as an allusion to the very real Gallic wars that took place between 58 and 50 BC. Asterix is a scrappy, undersized underdog that kids could identify with as standing up to the bully Romans, and as a result, the character gained worldwide fame, with comics, movies, and video games still being produced about him and his friends to this day. Longtime viewers of the channel may remember that I reviewed the original Asterix back in episode 84, and it turned out to be an awesome game, and it might be my favorite game that I've played on the Master System so far. I don't know, it's tough to choose between Phantasy Star and Asterix. It's simply that good a game, and it was really doing things that the Master System shouldn't be doing. But this review isn't for that game, it's for Asterix and the Secret Mission. I'm coming into this review like most Master System exclusives, and not knowing much about the game other than simply what I've seen on the box, but I'm hoping that just like the original game, Asterix and the Secret Mission goes above and beyond what would normally be expected on the Master System, and those are some pretty big shoes to fill. We shall see what they were able to come up with, but first, a look at the package.
And this is my copy of Asterix and the Secret Mission. I don't remember when I picked this up exactly, but it's probably been a few years now, one of my eBay purchases. A lot of people complain about eBay, and for good reason. There's some crappy sellers out there, but honestly, if you live in the United States and you're looking for Master System games, it's the easiest way I've found to pick them up. Yeah, there's some retro game stores with an online presence that are based in Europe, but for the most part, they refuse to ship to the United States, So you have to try to make friends with someone over there, ship it to them, and then have them ship it to you, and it's just a mess. Anyway, one of the benefits to eBay is if you're dealing with a decent seller, they're probably going to have some good pictures of the item, which is why I was able to pick out this particular copy of the game. From the outside, this copy is in fantastic condition, with both the clamshell and the inner cover being in nearly perfect condition, except for a broken corner at the top, which I'm assuming happened when it was dropped at some point. Either way, very minor, and I'm happy to have one that looks like this on the outside. As far as the front cover goes, I like it a lot. This is from that later generation of Master System covers from after the Master System 2 had been released, and you can tell that by the addition of the Master System logo at the top, and then the line at the bottom that mentions the Master System 2 and the power base converter. I hate that it took Sega this long to get to this point with the Master System games, but this looks great, with the colorful Asterix artwork front and center, and the logo popping due to having the subtle yellow outline around the name. If you flip over to the spine, you'll see one of the other things that I really like about this particular formatting, and that's the insertion of the artwork on the spine, so that it's not just the title. I love how all these look on the shelf. It's very eye-catching, and the whole thing is a huge step up from when there was just a basic black or blue text on the spines. Flipping over the back, and you'll see what looks like a pretty standard rear cover from the era, with 4 screenshots on the side, and then flavor text in 7 different languages trying to summarize the game. The screenshots are great, and at first look they make the game look very similar to the previous Asterix game, which is a good thing with as impressive as it was. There's not much to discuss in the flavor text, just because it's so short, but what is there is fine, and gives a nice summary of what's going on in the game. I do find it interesting though that the information box at the bottom, all that's listed is 1 player, rather than being the usual number of levels or type of controller. I don't know if I've seen that before. Opening up the box, and the manual is unfortunately a little more worn than the outside of the case, but it's still very legible and there's no tears, so that's good enough for me. It's a standard formatted PAL manual with 7 columns making up the 7 languages that were on the back. The manual explains the game well, assuming you can read the small font, and they didn't skimp on screenshots from the game, which is nice. You also get some more details on the plot, quite helpful if you're coming in without a lot of knowledge about Asterix in general. Okay, that's the package. Let's get to the game and see if Asterix in the Secret Mission can live up to the lofty heights of the original game. If you're not familiar with Asterix in general, the usual gimmick behind the various conflicts is that the Gauls are trying to defend their homeland against the conquering Romans. The Gauls are traditionally overmatched, with the Romans vastly outnumbering them. So how has Asterix managed to help fend off the Romans? Well, with a potion from a druid named Get a Fix. Get it? Yeah, you do. Anyway, this potion gives the Gauls superpowers, and allows Asterix, Obelix, and any of their Gallic buddies to fight off the Roman hordes. The plot of the first game was that Get a Fix had been kidnapped by the Romans, and you had to get him back because without his ability to make the special power potion, the Gauls surely would fall to the Romans. Now, in Asterix and the Secret Mission, Get a Fix is safe, but he's run out of ingredients to make the special potion, and to make matters worse, the Gauls have started to get sick, and without the healing effects of the potion, they are incredibly vulnerable to the Roman hordes. Now, it's up to Asterix and his rotund friend Obelix to go out and collect the ingredients for Get a Fix so that the Gauls can heal up and defend their homeland. Just as a quick aside, the whole Gauls getting sick thing isn't mentioned in the game at all, and it's only brought up in the manual in the backstory for the game. At least, it's not mentioned in the English translation anyway. Why do I bring that up? Well, one of the things that I've always appreciated about Asterix and now its sequel is that even with it being an 8-bit title, it still tries to make itself accessible to those that don't know English. I'm sure this is partially due to the fact that Asterix is originally a French property, so it makes sense for it to support French as well as English, but the game also supports German as well. It's one thing for the game to have support in the manual and on the back of the box for multiple languages. In fact, it's odd to find a PAL release that doesn't do that, but it's another thing entirely to support multiple languages in-game. And sure, that sort of thing is commonplace these days, but back in the 8-bit days when every byte counted, not so much. Anyway, it's not like that there's a ton of language in the game that needs to be read to begin with the text really being just limited to a few cutscenes that split up the levels, but I still think the existence of both the cutscenes and the language options are a nice touch. Anyway, whether the Gauls are actually getting sick or not, Get a Fix still needs those ingredients to make the potion if they're going to have any hopes of holding off the Romans, which is where Asterix and Obelix come in. Yes, just like in the previous game, the game can be played with either Asterix or Obelix, and as you would expect, both characters play differently, with Asterix having to collect and utilize 3 different potions to get himself out of certain situations, and Obelix instead using his trusty boulder. You'd understand if you were familiar with the cartoon, I think. Anyway, while Asterix and Obelix are both on the same mission to recover the 6 herbs needed to make the potion, they don't necessarily take the same path through the game, with about half the game being visited by both characters, but then the other half being dedicated to one character or the other. I actually like this a lot, because it means to fully experience Asterix in the secret mission, you'll need to play through the game twice. The downside to that, though, is that the game needs all the replay value it can get, because it's a tad on the short side, with it definitely being shorter than the original Asterix. This is somewhat disappointing with the game coming out 2 years after the original game. If anything, I would have expected there to at least be more of everything that made the first game great, certainly not less. In recording playthroughs with both characters, it took about 2 hours to run through everything, and that was after playing the game for about an hour and a half to get familiar with things. I may or may not have accidentally chosen to restart rather than continue when on the last level with Asterix on that first run, but we don't need to talk about that. The point is, you could easily finish both campaigns in under 2 hours, and honestly, I think if you get good at the game and memorize all the tricks, you could probably get that time down to an hour, hour and a half without much trouble, as a lot of the time I spent was being stuck on hidden things. This is where I've got another problem with the game, and unfortunately, I think it's somewhat just a product of its time. There's times when playing the game where making your way through isn't about skill, it's about knowing what to do. And in Asterix and the Secret Mission, there's only the vaguest clue of how to proceed, and that's assuming you have the manual, because it's not mentioned in the game anywhere. Specifically, when playing with Asterix, there's one section of the cave where you have to run into a wall to make a boulder fall down, which allows you to make a jump. For some reason, I feel like you had to do this or something similar in the first game as well, and they didn't explain it there either. Then, later on, when you make it into the temple in the last area, you have to go through a section and not kill any of the enemies that drop down from the ceiling, but the Romans on the ground are fair game. If you do take out the ceiling enemies, the level will just continue to loop and you'll never collect the 6th herb and be allowed to proceed. This definitely fell more into the frustrating than fun category for me. Afterwards, I did go back and check the manual, and if you look at the last page, there are tips listed of the last unsmashed rock that could be hiding something vital, and death from above, be it Roman or rock. But come on, how are you supposed to get anything of value out of that? There's one other thing that I have to call out that's not quite right about the game, and that requires us to go back to the rear cover of the game. Remember how I thought it was odd that the status box only had one player listed and nothing else? Well, as it turns out, that's not correct. Like the original Asterix, Asterix and the Secret Mission actually supports 2 players, which alternate as you go through the game. The only caveat is that you share one controller that's passed between the players. This is a good thing, and it's clearly explained in the manual, so I'm a little surprised that they messed up the rear cover like that. Let's move on to some things that I actually like about the game. I want to reiterate that I really like the ability to play as both Asterix and Obelix, and they both play great. When playing through Asterix and the Secret Mission, while there may be a few tricky sections here and there, for the most part, if you die during the game, it's due to something that you did. I think the only section I got stuck on from a gameplay perspective was the fountains in the hold of the ship, but once I figured out that I could hold down on the run button to have the fountains propel me further in the level, it was simply a matter of timing the rest of the jumps, and then it was on to the next thing. A game that actually plays well, especially when it comes to platforming, counts a lot for me, and I definitely enjoyed the time I spent playing the game versus being stuck on obscure puzzles. Asterix and the Secret Mission looks fantastic, with colorful graphics and great animation. It's clear the game has a cartoon for the source material, and the characters look like they were pulled straight from it. Each of the levels are varied, and you never feel like you're going through the same section again, just with some slight tweaks. There's plenty of variety to the Romans, with each of their disguises, I guess I'll say, fitting the levels that they're in. Some of the levels allow for backtracking, so you're not always stuck just going from left to right, and I especially liked the surfing level that Asterix gets, with the undulating waves being something that I wasn't expecting to see on the Master System, and serving as a nice break in the action between the platforming levels. The cutscenes I referred to earlier are nice to see as well, and I think my only complaint with those is that I wish there was more of them to explain why the characters were going to each of the different locations. But I suppose an Asterix game doesn't really need much more explanation than use potion, beat up Romans, does it? The music and the effects I don't like quite as much as the graphics, but I don't think that's anyone's fault. I want to be clear, I don't think the sound in Asterix and the Secret Mission is bad. On the contrary, it's totally fine, and I think the sound effects are probably a bit better than you might expect in your average Master System game. I think the problem is simply age. By 1993, the capabilities of a PSG-based sound chip had long since been passed by, and there was only so much that Sega could do with it. I don't think that you'll need to mute your TV when playing the game, but don't expect to be humming these melodies once you move on to something else either. Asterix and the Secret Mission had a tough job on its hands with being the follow-up to Asterix, a game that I don't think is a stretch to say is one of the best on the console. When releasing a sequel, developers tend to take one of two paths usually. If the team has a big enough budget, a game might get re-envisioned from the ground up, with a new engine, new gameplay concepts, etc. But then there's also the if it's not broken, don't fix it model, which is totally valid as well, where instead of really trying to make a new game, instead the developers simply create new content and levels to fit the original game design. The only issue with that second approach is if you're going to do that, fans are going to expect more content, larger and more levels, more items, more characters, more of everything. And when you don't deliver that, the game falls into cash grab territory. Unfortunately, Asterix and the Secret Mission could definitely be accused of that. Sega CS, the team at Sega responsible for both titles, appear to have just reused a bunch of the work previously created for the original game and thrown together some new levels and poof, new game. If you've never played the original Asterix, Asterix and the Secret Mission is a solid game in its own right, and it's a fun, amazing looking Master System game. But knowing that there is an existing game in the series that did everything that this game did and more from 2 years before, well, unfortunately, it's going to lose points for that. For that reason, I'm giving Asterix and the Secret Mission 3 stars. If you're a Master System fan and you like platformers, this one should definitely be in your collection, but if you have to choose, go with the first game and then circle back to this one later.
And that was Asterix and the Secret Mission for the Master System. I want to be clear, if you didn't get this out of the review section, that I do actually like this game. It's just not without its flaws, and that's a problem when you're trying to follow up on one of the best games on the console. I think it's very interesting that Sega went with Sega CS for the development of this game, but for the next game in the series, they handed things off to Core Design to get a fresh perspective on things. And I'll be very interested to see what Core did with both the Genesis and Master System versions of Asterix and the Great Rescue in the future, with both versions apparently being different games that just have a similar plot. Next week on Zilog and Moto, it was originally supposed to be a Master System game, but now thinking about what I said in the intro, let's change things up a bit and throw a Sega CD game in there instead, and really give some good variety to the beginning of Season 5. And after the events of last weekend's NFL season, specifically the Sunday night game, I can think of no better game to feature for this slot. Well, better is probably an incredibly relative term in this case, because I'm pretty certain that this game is going to be awful. In fact, I'm not even sure it's much of a game. But I guess I'll find all that out this week when I play it for the review. Well, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 184. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you are so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later.